couple of weeks ago, I went to my first ever convention as a guest. ArmadilloCon is a long-running sci-fi and fantasy literature convention, and I had an amazing time there. I got to speak on panels, meet several of my favorite authors, and get interviewed by a puppet from the Austin Public Library. But the highlight was getting to interview one of the guests of honor, author Samantha Mills, who has won several prestigious sci-fi and fantasy awards. Her work has appeared in many popular speculative fiction magazines such as Uncanny, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and Strange Horizons. I was so excited to ask her what it's like writing both short stories and longer books, how she goes about researching and building worlds for her stories, and how she got her debut novel published 7 years after she wrote it. And she was lovely enough to let me film our conversation, so I am thrilled to present my interview with Samantha Mills. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the ArmadilloCon 2025 interview with writer guest of honor Samantha Mills. Hi, my name's Ellie Blackwood. I am a sci-fi and fantasy writer in progress who makes video essays about books, science fiction, and Doctor Who. I have some bookmarks at the free tables out front if anyone wants to pick up those. They're sort of my business card with a bit of information about my channel and such on them. And I'm very honored to be interviewing Samantha today. So Samantha has published over a dozen short stories in a lot of very prestigious sci-fi and fantasy publications. In particular, her 2022 short story Rabbit Test won the Nebula, Locus, and Sturgeon awards. Her debut novel The Wings Upon Her Back came out in 2024, and that won the Compton Crook Award for Best Sci-Fi Fantasy Horror Debut. So I wanted to start off with a question about the breadth of your work. You have over a dozen short stories, and your debut novel came out last year. And actually, if I'm recalling correctly from what you said in one of the other panels, you actually started writing novels and then moved into short stories later, and that's how you first got published. So what are some of the differences between writing novels and short stories that you found?
Yes, I love this because I found short stories so difficult that I spent a lot of time thinking about why is this so different from writing books. And part of it was just that I had grown up reading novels, like several a week, and so that those structures were in my head even without thinking about it. And I was duplicating what I already knew. So in high school, I had some way too long derivative urban fantasy novels that will never see the light of day because that was the thing in the early 2000s. I didn't know the difference between word count and page counts. They were like 200,000 words because that was 350 pages on my computer. They were terrible, but it came naturally to do things in that structure of beginning, middle, end, and the way that stories worked. And they got better over time. So it was a thing that was just by practice, and then slowly realizing what elements I needed to work on and which I was doing automatically without realizing it, which can also cause a little bit of a plateau when you suddenly become self-aware of things and then don't know how to do them naturally anymore. But that's probably a different question. For short stories, I decided in college to make a game effort at learning them because I went, I can start submitting things. I knew that my books weren't ready yet, but I could dip my toes in the water, and I wanted a thicker skin because everybody was saying, you're going to get rejected so much, and you do. And I thought I'll feel a little less bad about the short stories, and then maybe I'll have the confidence to send out a book. But they were terrible. So I sent a few out, and the feedback was pretty much, the writing is good because I could make a sentence, but it isn't a story. Like, it's just a long scene, or it's the beginning of a story. And it took a while to figure out how to dial back those elements of novel where I was very reliant on character development in a way that you need time for that to happen. And so these things would be 7,000, 8,000 words, and mostly people talking and not actually get anywhere interesting. So I read a lot. I decided to take a break and I ended up coming back. It wasn't until 2015, 2016 that I got serious about it again and went, this time I'm really going to learn how to do it. And I devoted myself to reading more shorts. So I'd read a few collections by authors I liked, usually on accident, because I would pick them up thinking it was a new book and go, oh, short stories, but then they were fantastic. So there was Catherine Valenti's The Melancholy of Mecha Girl, and I read Kij Johnson's collection At the Mouth of the River of Bees, and it just blew my mind because these were doing something completely different from the short stories I had read in school. That they were playing with structure and theme in a really interesting way, and I felt very inspired. But I had to learn how to get to the point really fast, like know what this is about, and that it's a book. You can love the characters so much that you'll follow them on any adventure, and it can just kind of end, and you go, that was a great ride. And in a short story, you really need a point, and it has to build very quickly, and you have to learn how to say a lot in very few words, and that ended up feeding back into the way I write books, because I learned how to time jump finally. I didn't just follow people like from the moment they woke up to the time they went to bed and then wake up the next day, because I didn't know how to like cut around. And I found ways that, I can convey something huge in just a couple of sentences. And so that feeds back into the books too. But when I'm choosing whether something is a short story or a novel, it's really the depth that I want to get into the topic. So is it a single person at a moment of change, and I just need enough information to contextualize that? Then it's probably a short story. If I'm exploring a topic that I want the nuance of many angles, then I'm going to need more characters, and I'm going to need more time to set up those scenarios so that they are believable, and then I'm going into novel territory.
Yeah, awesome. So you mentioned that you learned how to jump around in time when you were honing your craft through these short stories. And a lot of your stories actually play with nonlinear time. So The Wings Upon Her Back has these dual timelines of the main character at different stages in her life. 10 Visions of the Future, which is your most recent publication, has these fractured possible futures. And Rabbit Test jumps forward and back in time to explore reproductive rights. So what interests you about playing with time in that way?
Partly it's you learn how to do a thing, and it's so exciting. You gotta put it in everything. But I also it partly reflects the way that I think, where I'm kind of an anxious personality. And it sometimes feels like I'm living in different eras at the same time. I think it's one of the ways that makes characters really grounded is understanding that people are always seeing the present moment through the lens of things they've gone through in the past. So even in a completely linear story, I don't quite believe a character who is just in the moment. I'm sure people exist that aren't constantly thinking about other stuff, but how we perceive threats and how we perceive anything really is based on prior experiences. When you're actually messing with the timeline, which is just a great fun tool that we have in sci-fi and fantasy, you can literalize those things. You can, if you're dealing with themes of PTSD, you can make it the experience manifested, that instead of just describing the mentality of being in the present moment and then suddenly being taken somewhere else for a while before you can come back, you can literally make that happen and sort of metaphorically work it into the speculative element. I'm also an archivist, and I deal with history as my day job, and so I'm constantly seeing parallels between the present day and the past, and I like to set those things side by side to show the effects. And again, speculative fiction is a great venue where you can play with those things thematically at the same time.
Yeah. How do you go about structuring a story with a nonlinear timeline?
I have a really terrible Word document with notes. I don't have anything fancy, but it's, so in the book, The Wings Upon Her Back, I knew I wanted 2 timelines from the start because I wanted to show how the character became who she is and then the fallout of that later. And then I did end up having a sneaky 3rd timeline in the epigraphs. There's quotes at the beginning of each chapter that refer to much farther back in time how the whole society ended up this way. And it's really hard, and I don't know if I'm going to do something exactly like that again, because the big challenge is you want both timelines to be compelling, and it doesn't work if the past sets up things you already know. It has to have some point to telling it that isn't just, you know, her whole backstory, but now we're just going to have it written out for some reason. It needs to be something that clarifies the present, and for the present to clarify the past. And I just make this weird color-coded outline on Word where at one point I even had like it as separate columns because I wanted the timelines to also have the same structure. I needed them both to come to like a midpoint at the same time so that those chapters that were side by side had that same escalation but going in opposite directions. So in the case of that book, I kind of envisioned this seesaw structure where in the present she starts off at her lowest point and has to climb out of it, and in the past she thinks that she's, you know, on the way up, and so it's going opposite directions. So they needed to meet in the middle with a big turning point in each, and then the end they had to come back together again, but again in a way that didn't just tell you things that you already knew. So my notes reflected that of I need a certain, I didn't draw it, but I could have drawn it. I had like this mental model of the ups and downs of the story and the rhythm of the story. And so that kind of dictated how the chapters would fall together.
Yeah, I loved how your past timeline kind of, reflecting on the past timeline kind of helped the main characters solve the mysteries of the present. And especially at the end when the two timelines converged and there were very similar things happening to the character at two times in her life separated by decades. I just got chills. I was like, oh my goodness, the parallels. The parallels. So we're going to talk more about the wings upon her back later, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Rabbit Test. And I think it's very appropriate to talk about Rabbit Test given where we are currently sitting. So we're sitting in Austin, and arguably the beginning of the end of Roe v. Wade was realized in Austin, because Roe v. Wade was overturned in June of 2022, but it was actually in September of 2021 the Texas Heartbeat Act went into effect. And the Texas Heartbeat Act allowed any private citizen to sue someone who performed or assisted in an abortion in Texas after 6 weeks of gestation, as opposed to the 24 weeks that was protected by Roe. It was clearly a stupid and unconstitutional law, but the enforcement mechanism meant it was really difficult to challenge in court, and so it hadn't worked its way through the courts by the time Roe v. Wade got overturned anyway, and Texas's current total abortion ban went into effect. So Texas really functionally had an abortion ban about 9 months before the rest of the states did. And Rabbit Test is about the past, present, and future of abortion rights. And I found it really interesting that it really explores how social progress isn't always linear, and rights are something that we have to continually fight for. We can't get complacent about them. And that's increasingly obvious in the present day, but 2022 was a really big gut punch reminder that we really can't take any of this stuff for granted. So why was it important for you to leave the story where it ends on this note of uncertainty but with a dash of hope?
Yes, I landed on that ending later. It was going to stop a little earlier on a much downer, where it's taken away again. And so it was going to be originally, I just had an idea for 3 braided parts, and it was going to be, oh my God, now I'm going to forget the year, in Connecticut, the case of Asenath Smith, which was the first abortion law in the country, which was a very wobbly one because the case wasn't really about abortion, but there had been a growing push amongst medical doctors to kind of push midwives out of the field, and so they made a law about not prescribing or not letting people do, not letting people use like the traditional means to do so, that you just needed to go to a male doctor for any maternity-related things. Anyway, so I wanted to explore that case and why it was so interesting, and then also do follow Roe v. Wade, but then my future timeline that lined up with the present of losing that again. But I decided, one, it's pretty pessimistic, because if the whole point is that we always fight for this and that we will not stop, there isn't a point where people anywhere in the history of the world have gone, well, I guess we can't control that anymore. And the more that I researched and found interesting historical facts about this, the more I went, okay, I need to broaden this. One, I need to broaden it more into the past, because the point is that this has been the entire scope of human history, has been, for anyone with a uterus, trying to figure out how to time this, because it is dangerous and people need you, and you can't just be pregnant all the time and potentially dying in childbirth. So there's been birth control in basically any culture that we have a record of. They have figured out something that they ate that made it happen and went, okay, we're going to dial in how to use this, dangerous or not. And there have been pregnancy testing of varying degrees of effectiveness, but people have been trying to pin it down for all time. And so once I saw the scope of that, I also wanted to go a little farther and go, okay, this is terrible what we're in, but there's hope on the other side too, because it does swing back around, but it doesn't swing back around on its own. So it only swings back with a really protracted fight, and you have to hold against that backlash, and that we forget after a generation or two very quickly. Battles that have been won, when you're raised with it, it feels like this is just normal and you take it for granted. But this was our mothers and grandmothers that this wasn't very long. It was just one generation's life where they could take this for granted in America. And so I wanted to end on that forward-looking note that don't give up. It is possible. It might not be. It's not going to be this year, and it's not going to be next year, but I'm confident that it will be in our lifetimes, and that maybe we can make it better for our kids.
Yeah. The story is just... I haven't read very many stories that are at once that raw and emotional and just kind of like a primal scream of frustration, but also so focused and just laser focused on the point that you're trying to make. It's absolutely masterful.
Thank you.
And you were talking about all of this research that you did. Obviously, you're an archivist, you're a historian, so it makes sense that you would have done all of this research on the history of reproductive rights in order to inform the sections in the short story that are about the future as well. So I was wondering if you could talk a little more about how you went about researching that history, and if you learned anything that surprised you.
So much. The history is so strange that other than the bits that are the near future, it's all real history, because I could not make up anything more interesting than the things that people have tried over time. I went about it. I'd had a few articles that I had already saved. It was initially spurred by the Supreme Court decision itself had been leaked a little bit in advance, and so we kind of knew the arguments they were going to make. And one of the quotes in it was basically, "This is not rooted in America's history," and I just kind of lost my top, because I was like, yes, it is. It's been the whole time. One of the earliest published ones that we have in the U.S. was a volume by Benjamin Franklin, and he had stolen it from somebody who actually wrote The Poor Planter's Physician, is what the book was in England, and he did a new edition for America, because copyright wasn't a thing then, and added a few bits, and he added an abortion recipe, and it was something that was just a very popular handbook. It also had math and all sorts of other household things, and so it was just something you would just have on your shelf that was not bought in the black market. It wasn't underground. Men and women were publishing advertisements in the newspaper, and I went through a lot of newspapers looking for some of them, and they all had euphemisms, because it wasn't quite the done thing to say what it was. But Dr. Reynolds' lightning pills, and you take one a month, and things like that for birth control and other. And so it started there. There used to be some really great histories on government websites, and I have the links So like you can find it on the Wayback Machine. So it's also, if you like love something on the internet, actually bookmark it so that you can find it again one day without having to just do a search. Because if you search one day and the website is gone and you don't remember the URL, you're kind of out of luck. But the NIH used to have like a really detailed like timeline of pregnancy testing, and that led me down a bunch of rabbit holes and searching for those. And then it was kind of hopscotching from there, where like each thing would lead me to another interesting source. But the most surprising thing was probably the frogs, which if you read it is this really weird interlude where so the name of the story, Rabbit Test, comes from an actual test in the 50s. They discovered that if you, it's a little grim, if you inject a juvenile female rabbit with the urine of a woman, and then dissect that rabbit later, if the woman was pregnant, she has an elevated level of HCG in her blood and in her urine, that will enlarge the ovaries of the rabbit. Like it'll start responding as if it's going to ovulate, and then you know that she's pregnant. And this was a wildly popular test because people want to know, and so it would be things like you're going to travel overseas, and if you're well-to-do enough and you could afford to send away for this test at a lab, you could do that, because you don't want to travel. It's going to be too dangerous, and it would be such a, I'm going to take a 3-month boat ride. You don't want to get on that boat pregnant and not know it. And then there was this alternate test with frogs, which the frogs did not die, which made it a more useful test because you could keep reusing them. But it was the same, like if you injected the frogs, they would just like pop out eggs. But this was so popular worldwide that they were exporting frogs from South Africa all over the world. And a lot of times frogs get out because frogs get out, and they were carrying this weird fungus that is deadly to all other frogs, and it's causing this frog apocalypse that's still ongoing in the world. And I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't have tried to find a test. It's just one of those weird things of history that you trace it back and go, wait, what? 1, there was a frog pregnancy test, and 2, it is killing all the frogs in the world.
Wow. So what you're saying is you could have called the story Frog Test.
Yes, it doesn't quite have the ring, and I don't think it was as well known here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your most recent short story, mm-hmm. which is titled 10 Visions of the Future, or Self-Care for the End of Days. Yes. Where you write about how a couple supports each other and finds small joys during several different possible mm-hmm. apocalypses. Mm-hmm. So there's different possible futures that they're mm-hmm. and they're exploring, how do we support each other during this time? What do you think the role of storytellers is in helping people cope with darkness in the world? Because this is very much a story that's responding to what do we do when the world is falling apart? Yeah,
Sam having an anxiety attack in December of 2024. Yes, I think that literature there's like the writer side of things and the reader side of things. And from the writer side of things, one, it can be very cathartic. I felt a little bit better after I write something like that, and I go, okay, I can like thrust it at people, like, do you feel the way I feel? Like, please read this. There's also connecting with people that way. I think it's very powerful to actually put into words what is happening and that it is not normal. And writers are uniquely equipped to do that and to combat propaganda and say this is not right and it shouldn't be like this. So I think that's important. From the reader point of view, I think that there's 2 kinds of comfort that we get from literature, and it's causing a really interesting, these 2 little bubbles rising in speculative fiction right now. Cozy fantasy is having a big moment, and horror is having a big moment. And I think it's for the same exact reason, which is that people are in a horrible, just the daily life outside of the house is such a disaster, and our phones are full of bad news, and some of it's encroaching on people faster than others. And so either you're feeling the urge to escape entirely and go, I just need something nice to reset, and it's so good for your mental health to just reset for a little bit and step away from the phone. It will still be there. And on the other end, people want to feel validated, and they want to see the bad thing is real and I'm not imagining it, and also maybe there's a chance to, whether it's vanquished or not, because horror can kind of go either way. There is validation in going, you do see this, and I'm not imagining it.
Yeah. I guess there's also a sense of, it's a bit like a roller coaster where you can face the darkness, but you know it can't actually hurt you because it's just a story.
Yeah.
But yeah, you make a really interesting point about how people are looking for both comfort but also validation. So now I wanted to ask a little bit about The Wings Upon Her Back, which is your debut novel that came out last year. So in The Wings Upon Her Back, we're in this city that is divided into these 5 sects that each follow a different god, but one of the sects kind of thinks they should be in charge. And the story is, there's one timeline that's set kind of during this sect rising up and trying to oppress all the others, and there's another timeline that's set 26 years later where the protagonist, who has been supporting this regime, now has the opportunity to bring it down. So we see both her getting indoctrinated into serving this regime, and specifically into serving a charismatic, abusive parental figure who is sort of the head of this regime. And then 26 years later, finally breaking out of that toxic situation and taking control of what, and sort of questioning, what do I actually believe and what do I actually want to fight for? So how did you go about writing a character who does a lot of bad things in service of this regime but is ultimately trapped in that situation?
I was interested initially in abusive dynamics of how does somebody end up in a situation where their entire life is controlled by another person, and what does it take to kind of wake up from that and pull away? Especially, there's like the sunk cost fallacy of the longer you're in it, the more you go, if I admit this was wrong, I have to admit that either I've done bad things myself, or even just that I wasted all that time of my life. And it's harder the longer that goes because of that mental block of like, it has to have been worth it, or what did I just do with my life? So I was very interested in that, and the more that I was kind of picking apart that, the more parallels I saw with certain strongman styles of governance, which are the same. It's this very bullying, if you do anything wrong, it's your own fault. If you do everything I say, it will all be okay. And so I decided to mash those into one. What if the person is like in control of your life, and also the head of state, and also, you know, the voice of your God, and like, it's a lot. It's a lot to get out of. I was very concerned about ending up in the unlikable protagonist range, where you go, why should I give a shit about this person? Sorry. Why should I care that she feels bad now? So that was partly why I felt like I needed to show how easy it is for a well-intentioned person to kind of hold on to that rhetoric of the enemies are out there, and if you work to protect, you're actually a good person. You're actually protecting your family and your city. And so I wanted to explore that, and then have that. I think having the child soldier angle made it a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more sympathetic, that you're a teenager and you're believing this rhetoric. But I also wanted to not just make it so it's all understandable, and sometimes people join a fascist movement, and they were young. So I do try to have the other characters push back on that and go, okay, at some point you become an adult. Like, were you innocent and then you woke up the next morning at another age and you're culpable now? And so it's, where does that change happen? Because it's just, time is slippery, and it is not so easy to just say, oh, you were an innocent child then, but now you're an adult responsible for undoing all of this. And I didn't want it to be too easy of an answer. So hopefully, and it's so far so good, having that tension between those two mentalities makes her a complex enough character that you can kind of go along with with where she's been and where she's headed now. And also starting in the present, I think, was important to me. For that reason. Yeah.
And the story kind of starts off with her starting to question, and she does something that that is actually the right thing for once and then gets punished for it. So the first thing we learn about her when we meet her is that she is starting to break out of this mentality. So I think that was really effective for starting off with that context and then showing how she got corrupted, because you know what's coming and you know that she's not going to believe this forever.
Right.
So I think that maybe gives the reader a little bit more patience with her. No, I love how complex of a character she is. And one of the things I was interested in is how in The Wings Upon Her Back, the city is almost kind of treated as a character.
Yes.
And I was trying to surreptitiously Google it, so I promise I wasn't like scrolling through TikTok or something while you were talking. But you have a quote that is on the book's cover and on the bookmarks that you hand out about the book that references the city, and I can't remember for the life of me what it is.
So it's a quote from these kind of interstitial bits that are in the book. It is, "A city is a place that knows the truth of itself. A city is a story, and the story of Bethesda is a strange one."
Right. So I wanted to ask, how did you come up with the world in The Wings Upon Her Back, and what is the significance of the city as a character?
People might have heard me talk about this at the con, but one of the things I love about fantasy and speculative fiction in general is that you can build a world that mirrors your character's arc, especially when it's a standalone. It can be like a really tightly interwound structure where you have like a macrocosm story and a microcosm, and they reflect each other. And it's almost like having a little thought experiment where you control all the variables. You can be like, people do this. And people go, they don't do that in the real world. In this world, this is what people do. And under these theoretical circumstances, what does this experiment produce? It produces a lot of dysfunction usually. Otherwise, it's not a lot of story. But in this case, once I knew the arc that I wanted the character to go through, I built a city around her that was going through the same crisis on the bigger level. And kind of add that weight to it, that it's not just one person going through this, but this entire group of people that have been through a lot of emotional tug of war. So they have 5 gods that descended upon the city at some point in the not too distant past, which also raises some questions about if they're gods, where were they before that? And they transformed what was kind of a pastoral village in a little isolated mountain. They bestow technologies upon them, so they like sometimes as literal schematics, and change the society completely. So much like the main character Zemeli with her mentor, they're completely beholden, and there's a very vast power differential here of these almost parental gods who can give affection and take it away. And before the story begins, they have gone to sleep. They don't know why they lost interest, but they sometimes wake up a little bit and answer, but for the most part, they've turned away. And so the entire city and these 5 different sects that kind of evolved under the teachings of each one are fighting each other over whose fault it is. Like, you drove them away. The warrior group that takes over is the very literalist. It's because you all weren't behaving properly, and so I'm going to like ratchet this place in and get their love back again. And that's similar to what the main character is going through, which is recognizing that somebody that you have worshipped essentially isn't who you thought and doesn't care about you the way that you were hoping, and that you can't keep degrading yourself trying to win that person, that it's time to figure out who you are yourself.
Yeah. I love that, how I was sort of getting it a little bit, and then when you said that, it all just clicked for me, how the world is, it does actually mirror the character's arc, and the arc of what the people of the city are going through does mirror what the arc of the character is going through in some respects. So you mentioned earlier that you have these epigraphs at the start of each chapter, and they have they're little snippets from lore and scholarly writings.
The historical documents.
Yeah, the historical documents. So as an archivist and a historian, what's the significance of including those little snippets of the historical documents to you?
A couple things. One, it's just so much fun. One of the things that's really both frustrating and interesting about studying history is that you never have the full story, and you never will. There is simply not a comprehensive narrative that was written contemporaneously, and that you can also trust, because there sometimes will be histories and you find out someone had beef with some, like, it just never, you never know. And more often than not, we just end up with these little snippets that we're trying to piece together, and we'll make grand theories. And in the case of this city, it was a history that was partly suppressed on purpose because people were very hurt by what had happened, and destroyed a lot of these documentation. And so I didn't want there to be a moment where the character discovers some very convenient document that tells you everything that happened. And I feel that same way about spirituality. And so with the gods, it was, they're there, which is a fun thing that you can mess with in fantasy as well, that you go, okay, faith isn't the issue here, because they're literally, like, they're there, you can see them, you can go up, you can talk to them. But it doesn't make it clear cut what they're teaching you and how your society grows in response to that. So partly I wanted those documents to have a little third timeline that is following that same arc of we're seeing that hopefulness followed by that disillusionment, that is that same back and forth, and they tie into, there is yet another thing. I was putting a lot of things in here. There is an essay that is in 5 parts that is scattered through the book at turning point moments that is one seamless thing when you put it together, and it's again that same arc of kind of walking you through the argument. And it's this heretical work that was again supposed to be destroyed, and that they're fighting over again because they think a copy has turned up. And yeah, so partly it was just my day job.
Yeah, it also kind of helps the world feel more real,
right,
because the city does have scholars and scholarship that shape how people think about their situation. I do want to pull on a little bit of a thread that you brought up there. So obviously The Wings Upon Her Back deals with systems of oppression that are set up in the name of religion, but it never takes a firm stance on whether the gods are actually worth following. And there's a quote from the book that I highlighted because I thought it was really interesting, where it says, "Faith isn't believing in gods, it's believing in their wisdom." So I was wondering what made you take that ambiguous direction where you're not really endorsing the gods one way or another, but you're also not saying you shouldn't follow the gods and it's bad.
So this was kind of my own feelings about a lot of different teachings that I didn't want it to just be, in the end, like, religion was bad all along, and it was, people can take such meaning from these things, and I don't feel that that's necessarily negative. What I do feel is negative is people that take advantage of those structures. So in this case, it's a woman using that against people and basically going, if you're a true believer, you'll do what I say. But it was never actually in service to the gods. It's that person and equating themselves with it. And so that's where I have a stronger feeling of that is where it goes wrong, is when you're using it against people and not letting it be an individual relationship. And it was also my feeling with the broader theme of breaking out from under somebody that turned out not to actually quite not really to believe the things being espoused. And it doesn't mean that everything they said was a bad lesson to take. And it was kind of that like parent-child dynamic going on again, that you can grow up and realize your parents are more complicated than you thought and maybe didn't believe everything that they taught you in their true hearts. But it doesn't mean that you have to then make your life the opposite in every single way out of spite or betrayal. You can kind of pick through it and go, what was valuable here? What really spoke to me and can lead me to do some good in the world? it's that memory is tainted, but it doesn't mean that it was all wrong to begin with just because it was taken advantage of in that way. So I wanted to lead the character to just a more nuanced relationship with her faith, that she was taking kind of, where in her case she was very attracted to this warrior mentality because of the protector side and not the I want to go fight people side. And it's how do you take that part back and let go of the toxic parts and find a middle ground.
Yeah, that's something I really vibe with when I'm reading fantasy, because I'm a Christian who has gone through a period of deconstruction from a version of the faith that was quite rigid and had a lot of mentalities that I have currently come to consider to be quite toxic. And so I love fantasy that digs into religion and sort of teases apart what are the parts that you can find positivity in this and can really enhance people's lives for the better, and then what are the parts that where it can be actively harmful. And so I really love that aspect about the wings upon her back. Now it's time for a little bit of a fun one.
Okay.
So like I said, there are these 5 sects of there are these 5 sects with that each follow a different god. So there's the Mecha god whose followers are warriors, and that's the sect that Zemeli follows for most of her life. There's the Scholar god, and whose followers are scholars, and that was the family that Zemeli was born into, and then later switched to the Mecha god sect. And then there's the Creator god, whose followers are engineers. There's the Earth god, whose followers are farmers. And there's the Worker god, whose followers are laborers. So if you were a character in the world of the wings upon her back, which of the gods, if any, would you align yourself with?
I would end up in the Scholar Sect, which I was having some fun having her be born a scholar and then just be completely uninterested in and rejected entirely. But I would be like the brother character who's like, no, you don't understand. This is the whole point of everything, is knowing the truth and sharing it. Even though I think they can be, in the book, a little bit insular, where they're not quite considering the trials that, you've got a cush gig. You're in this nice tower with all your books, and it's a smaller group, and the laborers are the biggest group that are kind of getting the worst end of this deal because they should be honored equally for their contributions, and are not. And then the farmers are kind of out of town and out of mind, so they kind of have their own thing going on because they're outside the walls, because you cannot support a city inside of a city without a lot of vast land around it that you get you can kind of get out of the immediate strictures of the people holding on. But yeah, I'd be the scholar. Yeah.
Was there a bit of a critique of academia and how you approached writing the Scholar Sect?
Ooh, this is an interesting question.
You just mentioned
definitely the like insular nature, where they're so focused on the principle of the matter that they don't, they find, one of the characters finds this document perhaps, and on the principle of the matter, this should be published again because you should not be hiding knowledge. And that is where I would fall. I would have been very obnoxious about it. But they don't really consider the ramifications that this is going to have on everybody else as the fighting breaks out. And so there is a little bit of like, this is a thought experiment. And people are having crises of faith left and right over what they're going, no, it's just a thought experiment. Like, what if things didn't happen the way we thought? And why are you all getting so upset about this? That I think can be a little tone deaf in real life. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I kind of read that as, they were trying for a little bit of plausible deniability, because they knew that they knew that if they published this heretical document, people, the Mecha God's followers might actually kill them all.
Right.
And that is pretty much exactly what ends up happening.
Don't censor. Don't ban heretical documents.
Yeah, right. So was it kind of both motivations? Like, on the one hand, they're trying to... on the one hand, they are genuinely bringing this scholarly approach to it that doesn't really work when you're talking to the average person who's like, but I'm looking for concrete answers, and you're not actually helping by saying, but what if it's ambiguous? And trying to be very academic about it when I'm not an academic, I just want you to give it to me straight, versus trying to keep things ambiguous because actually that might help you survive.
Yeah, I think it was just me trying to explore the tension between those two ways of approaching reality. It is a lot easier. Propaganda is so accessible because it is simple. It is like, I have the answer. Things do make sense, and I can just like get it down to a little phrase. There is a clear enemy. There are clear parameters, and dealing with the messy nature of history and culture is going, well, it's not ever actually that simple, and there are reasons, there's context, there's different people have different needs and situations, and that's a real tough sell when people just want to be like, just, I want to live my normal life, so you just tell me what to do so I don't have to worry about that and stay up at night worrying about that. And so I'm on that scholar side, but with the understanding that communicating those values is very difficult.
Yeah, and I can imagine there's also an element of people might kind of feel like, my concerns are not being heard, and the Scholar Sect is like, here's this giant 80-page treatise.
I made a book about it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I don't want a book, I want you to listen to me.
Yeah, that it was, they're safe in their tower for now. Not for the whole book, because it does eventually reach them in a dramatic way, but that the people on the street striking for bread lines they're not aided by this, as you need to also be helping people directly and not just theorizing about it.
Yeah, I think I would be remiss if I didn't sort of pull on the connection with book banning a little bit.
Yeah.
Because obviously there's this heretical document that they're trying to hunt down and destroy. Could you talk a little bit about the parallels between that and some of the book bans that we're seeing today across the U.S.?
Yeah, I think it's part of, again, like I was saying with propaganda, there's an incentive to make a simple narrative and say, this is what we were founded on, this is our values, this is, have always been the good guys. And anything that challenges that becomes a crisis. And so you'll see it with basically any university that's trying to teach American history that isn't just like your 6th grade textbook version of a series of events that led us to here, but here's what was going on for other people in the country at the time. And it isn't actually, a victory isn't always a victory, or it wasn't, we made advances, but they weren't shared equally among everybody. And it can cause that kind of, that destabilization of, so you're telling me we're bad, and I'm going to cling to the narrative that is simpler and that is more soothing. So it is definitely a parallel to book banning and trying to control knowledge and historical narrative.
Yeah. And I mean, specifically for Texas, I think a lot about how we have this myth of the Alamo.
We have different textbooks. Like, I'm from California, and there's like a whole industry of editing them to go to the 2 different states. We're learning different things.
I mean, you grow up hearing Texas history, and it's like, oh, these valiant,
the rancher,
the valiant Texans fought off the evil Mexican army and became free. And it's like, I mean, they were living in part of Mexico, though. I mean, obviously, history has its, there's a lot of different dynamics, but you grow up hearing this very sanitized version of the Alamo story, and there's more to it than that. And,
there's always more to it.
The people defending the Alamo were not necessarily sort of uncomplicated good guys. So, talking about the meta of The Wings Upon Her Back, you have a little afterword where you mentioned that The Wings Upon Her Back is a novel that is 7 years in the making. You started working on it in 2017 and it finally came out in 2024. So could you share a little about the journey of how this book came into the world?
Yes, I will do my best. There might be different versions floating around because I forget like exact dates, but partly it's a process thing where I will write out a whole draft and I will let it sit for a while and I will work on something else to kind of cleanse my palette, and then I'm able to come back to it and see it as a reader and go, oh, this is actually really boring in the middle or something like that. And so I did a few drafts myself that way. And I had that, and I had one other book completed that I was going back and forth on. And the other one was a completely different tone. It was like a weird Western, and it was kind of funny. And I was going to start approaching agents, so I decided the other one was more polished, and I sent that one out first. And it's kind of a long process if you have not done this yet. So it ended up being a year and a half for that to bear fruit. And so I edited this one again and sent that out. And I ended up getting, it was this interesting thing where I got pretty much no interest in my query for Wings. And I ended up getting signed for the other book. And then we couldn't sell that book because we went out in 2020 and everybody had like really contracted and were not, taking as much and didn't vibe with, whatever. So then I came back to this one again, and so that was partly why there had been a gap, because then I was editing that book to go out with my agent. And then when that didn't go anywhere, I went, well, let me see what I have in the drawer, and I had this. And at that point, it had the 2 timelines, but it didn't have the epigraphs, and it didn't have the essay. And reading it again years later, I saw a lot of themes in it that I had not before. And that's another reason I like letting things sit, is because I'll find out. It's like a little therapy session. You go, what was I really preoccupied with at the time? What happened in here naturally without me planning to? And can I draw that out more? And it really helps in the editing process too, because you suddenly go, it comes into focus, and you go, oh, I know what to cut now as well, because it's just kind of meandering, and I know the through line here finally. So I did another round of that. And then I had a terrible 2021 where I didn't write anything because I was dealing with some family tragedy, and it was actually Rabbit Test in 22 that was my return finally to write. I had tried and I kept flaming out on things, and then it gets in your head I forgot how, and I can't do this anymore. And writing that story broke the dam. And I was able to do one more round of this. And at that point, my sister had passed away. That was the big 21 thing. And editing this, it became like the book that I edited while that was happening. And so some of it leaked in. There's a lot of that family dynamic stuff that wasn't quite as direct originally. And that essay in particular was, me talking directly to people in a way that felt very cathartic at that time. So that is why it took so long. And then publishing itself is long as well. So it sold in the fall of 22, and which means you get a spring 24, just because it takes a while to go back and forth with the editor, and you need time in the printer queue. So that last year and a half was just waiting. Yeah.
Well, I'm very glad that it got there eventually.
Yes,
because it's a
eventually.
fantastic story. I'm going to open it up to audience questions in just a second, but first I wanted to ask if you can share, what are you working on next?
Yes. In the spring, I'll have a short story collection out. It is Rabbit Test and Other Stories, kind of the natural title. That'll be from Tachyon. We put the cover up and everything soon. I'm really excited about that. And then I am working on a new standalone fantasy for them that, if I get it turned in sometime soon, will be out that following spring or summer, maybe summer, or maybe fall of 26. And that one is, it's more of, my problem in this one is healthcare. And I have a very different sort of city that is divided in half, not into 5. And there is a very wealthy side of the city that is taking advantage of all these amazing medical advancements that they are having, and a side that cannot afford them and is just going into debt over it and having some bizarre health issues due to a parasite that lives in the river that infects people. And the main character and her sister are trying to scam somebody, and it goes horribly wrong. And it escalates into breaking into this mountain stronghold where these laboratories are located. And I will leave it at that so I don't spoil too much. But I'm very excited about it. I'm having a great time. It's got that kind of meaty theme work that I like, but it has a little more humor too, because the main character is just a mess and has memory problems. And and causes a lot of chaos. So I wasn't in such like a dark place as it was trying to get through this, which I find very important right now, is to try and find some levity in. I think that people naturally do that. And I'll let us go to questions.
Okay, excellent. Laboratory Mountain Heist.
Yes.
Yes. I do want to ask real quick.
Yes.
The short story collection, is that going to be all short stories you've had published elsewhere, or are there any in there that are exclusive to the
Yeah, there's
collection?
2 new ones. So it was my favorite of everything I have out so far, and then 2 new stories.
Excellent. All right. Well, any questions from the audience?
Yes.
Do you have like a local bookstore that you use that you maybe sign books?
So hold on, I wanted to say
sorry.
the question for the microphone. So the question was, do you have a local bookstore that people can order signed copies of your works from?
So I don't have that set up. My nearest store is Mysterious Galaxy, but I could talk to them. But Tachyon Publications sells books directly, and whenever they're in San Francisco and I'm in San Diego, so whenever we overlap, I sign a bunch of stuff for them, and I just did. So they'll have like a stock of signed stuff for a while. And I also, if people email me, I send a book plate. If they want to slap one in. If they aren't specific about it being physically signed onto the paper, then I'm happy to mail that out. Thank you for asking.
Awesome. Any more questions? All right.
Okay.
Hearing none, this conversation is adjourned. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Samantha.
Thanks for having me.